The damaging impact of the United States military operation against Iran became visible in early May 2026. Gun owners who depend on routine ammunition purchases are now facing the possibility of empty shelves at local firearms stores as production facilities running at full capacity shifted priority toward Pentagon contracts. While President Donald Trump stated that America possessed an almost unlimited reserve and the highest ammunition output levels, classified Pentagon assessments and reports from the Center for Strategic and International Studies described a far more difficult situation. A 5-week bombing operation consumed more than half of the nation's pre-war stockpile of critical long-range weapons. These included Tomahawk missiles, forcing manufacturers such as Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics to suspend or reduce commercial ammunition manufacturing in order to fulfill military demand. On May 2, 2026, Washington informed allies across Europe, including the United Kingdom, Poland, Lithuania, and Estonia, along with Ukraine, that extended delays would affect deliveries tied to NASAMS and HIMARS systems. The same corporations responsible for those military systems also oversee civilian brands such as Federal, Remington, Winchester, and CCI. As military contracts received full priority, commercial ammunition shipments were reduced or halted beginning in early May 2026. The conflict created the largest supply disruption since the pandemic-era buying surge. Understanding which calibers may vanish first, why factories redirected output, and how retailers are responding became essential for firearm owners attempting to continue training and personal defense preparation. The 5-week air campaign against Iranian targets consumed enormous quantities of ordnance. Navy destroyers and submarines launched hundreds of Tomahawk cruise missiles. The Air Force released thousands of JDAM munitions. Fighter aircraft also used large numbers of missiles throughout the operation. According to analysis published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies on May 5, 2026, the United States used more than 50% of its pre-war supply of Tomahawk missiles, SM-6 interceptors, JASSM-ER missiles, and ATACMS systems during the campaign. The shortage became severe enough that the Pentagon redirected weapons inventories previously reserved for the Indo-Pacific theater into the Middle East. Few discussions focused on the fact that the same defense firms manufacturing military weapons also operate civilian ammunition divisions. With military production lines pushed to maximum output and Pentagon contracts taking precedence, civilian ammunition manufacturing either slowed dramatically or stopped entirely during early May 2026. Pentagon data outlined the scale of the depletion. The campaign reportedly consumed more than 800 Tomahawk cruise missiles, representing between 50 and 60% of inventory. More than 200 SM-6 interceptors were used, equal to roughly 40% of stockpiles. Approximately 400 JASSM-ER missiles were expended, exceeding 50% of available supply. Significant quantities of ATACMS tactical missiles and thousands of JDAM units were also consumed during the operation. The total estimated cost reached between $8 and $12 billion across 5 weeks. Production capacity could not match wartime usage rates. Annual Tomahawk output remained around 100 to 150 missiles during peacetime conditions, while the Iran campaign alone consumed more than 800 within only 5 weeks. At those manufacturing levels, replenishing stockpiles would require between 5 and 8 years. Similar shortfalls affected additional missile systems, pushing the Pentagon to direct nearly all available manufacturing toward military restocking efforts. Resources intended for a potential Taiwan contingency were also diverted. Munitions originally allocated to the Indo-Pacific region shifted toward the Middle East operation, reducing available reserves in Asia and increasing pressure to maximize production. That urgency directly contributed to civilian ammunition rationing measures. On May 2, 2026, warning notices sent to the United Kingdom, Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, and Ukraine confirmed delays involving NASAMS and HIMARS deliveries. Those weapons programs shared facilities and supply chains connected to commercial ammunition manufacturing. Civilian rifle ammunition became one of the first categories impacted as military production demands intensified across the defense industry. Federal, Winchester, and Remington manufacture military 5.56 NATO rounds and civilian .223 ammunition using the same assembly lines, identical primers, powder supplies, and brass casings. As military contracts received full priority status, several production facilities paused commercial output. Retailers stated that Federal and Winchester informed distributors about shipment interruptions beginning in May 2026. By late May, many stores expected shelves to be nearly empty. Rifle ammunition in 7.62 and .308 calibers also faced restrictions. Military demand for 7.62 NATO rounds intended for machine guns and sniper systems moved ahead of civilian .308 production. The Lake City Army Ammunition Plant, operated by Winchester, the largest ammunition plant in the country, shifted entirely toward military obligations and stopped commercial sales. 9mm handgun ammunition encountered similar pressure. This caliber remains the most common sidearm round used by military personnel, submachine gun platforms, and allied training programs. Civilian 9mm products from Federal, Winchester, and Remington entered severe allocation limits. CCI and Speer also reduced shipments intended for civilian buyers. Production of 50 BMG ammunition moved almost completely toward military use because of demand tied to M2 machine guns and Barrett rifles. Commercial availability effectively dropped to zero beginning in May. Reloaders also faced growing shortages. CCI primers, along with Hodgdon, IMR, and Alliant powder products, all came from companies holding military contracts. Primer manufacturing shifted into military cartridge assembly operations, while powder inventories were redirected toward military specifications. Reloading materials for civilians disappeared from stores even faster than fully assembled ammunition. Some calibers remained available for a limited period because they held little or no military value. Shotgun shells in 12-gauge and 20-gauge, along with rimfire .22 LR ammunition, saw fewer restrictions due to limited military application. Niche calibers, such as .45-70 and .300, Win Mag also remained temporarily available. Even so, shortages in raw materials continued affecting their production. The manufacturing system itself entered a capacity crisis. Ammunition production depends on specialized machinery for case forming, primer insertion, powder charging, projectile seating, and quality inspections. Most facilities already operated continuously under peacetime conditions, running 24 hours a day and 7 days each week. Factories could not simply expand output by adding more shifts. Constructing new production lines required between 12 and 24 months, along with investments reaching hundreds of millions of dollars. Supply chains added another layer of strain. Manufacturing depended on brass, copper, zinc, and lead for bullet construction and copper jackets. Specialized primer chemicals included lead, styphnate, and barium nitrate, while powder plants relied on nitrocellulose production. Packaging materials also faced limited supply. Brass mills, primer factories, and powder facilities were already functioning at maximum levels and could not significantly increase production without entirely new infrastructure. Military contracts also carried legal priority. Federal acquisition regulations and the Defense Priorities and Allocation System granted the Pentagon authority to place defense orders ahead of commercial sales. When rated orders were issued under the Defense Production Act, manufacturers became legally obligated to complete military contracts first, even if civilian orders faced delays or cancellation. Labor shortages deepened the problem. Ammunition manufacturing required trained workers, and the industry lacked enough skilled personnel to expand quickly. Preparing new employees required months or even years of training. The United States traditionally supplemented domestic ammunition production with imports from Israel, South Korea, and European suppliers. Rising Middle East tensions disrupted Israeli exports. European manufacturers concentrated on NATO stockpile replacement, while South Korean companies redirected production toward military commitments. Those changes sharply reduced imports available for civilian buyers. Major retailers began reporting shortages during early May. Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops, and Sportsman's Warehouse all described declining shipments. Federal and Winchester informed stores about allocation reductions, ranging from 40 to 70% for military calibers. Some stock-keeping units disappeared entirely from the civilian market. Online ammunition retailers also displayed rising out-of-stock notices. AmmoSeek, SG Ammo, and Bulk Ammo showed growing shortages involving 5.56, 7.62, and 9mm products from major manufacturers. Prices on remaining inventory increased between 20 and 40% during the first 2 weeks of May. Expectations grew that costs could double or even triple as shortages intensified further. Local firearms stores responded by limiting purchases. Independent retailers introduced restrictions, such as 1 box per caliber for each customer per day, reduced bulk buying, and membership requirements. Store owners also reported panic buying, which created additional shortages even for calibers not yet heavily affected. Reloaders searching for components encountered almost no remaining supply. Primers became nearly impossible to locate. Production from CCI, Federal, Winchester, and Remington shifted almost entirely toward military demand. Powder supplies also continued shrinking across the civilian market. Bullets could still be found in some locations, but reloaders without primers and powder could no longer assemble ammunition. Gun owners responded by purchasing the maximum quantities allowed and storing large reserves in preparation for a prolonged shortage. That behavior accelerated the disappearance of retail inventory and created a chain reaction where even calibers not directly affected started becoming difficult to find. Firearm owners using concealed carry weapons or maintaining guns for home protection were urged to secure defensive ammunition immediately. A minimum reserve of 500 rounds for defensive calibers became the recommended target. Waiting for discounts or lower pricing carried risk because current stock could represent the final available supply for several months. Focus remained centered on 9mm handgun ammunition, 5.56 and 2.23 rifle rounds, plus 12-gauge shotgun shells. Gun owners relying only on military calibers such as 9mm, 5.56, and 7.62 were also encouraged to consider firearms chambered in less affected calibers. These included 4, 5 ACP, 4.0S and W, 10mm, 3.57 Magnum, and 4.4 Magnum. Those cartridges lacked major military contracts and could remain available longer, allowing continued firearm use even if primary calibers disappeared from stores. At the same time, excessive panic buying was discouraged. Purchases were advised to remain within realistic limits for defense and training needs. Extreme stockpiling only accelerated shortages and pushed prices higher. A reasonable reserve was described as between 500 and 1,000 rounds for defensive use, along with 1,000 to 2,000 rounds for regular training. Reloading equipment also gained attention. For firearm owners who had never reloaded ammunition, this period was described as a possible time to invest in the equipment. Primers and powder remained scarce, yet conditions for components could improve sooner than supplies of factory-loaded ammunition. Reloading presses, dies, and scales were still available in some markets. Brass cases could be reused multiple times, while bullets remained easier to find compared with primers and powder. Retail inventory required constant monitoring. Buyers were advised to check stores daily, register for in-stock alerts from online retailers, and follow local gun shops through social media updates announcing deliveries. In many areas, new shipments disappeared within only a few hours after arriving. Moderate price increases were considered unavoidable, paying between 20 and 40% above prices seen before the shortage was described as acceptable under current conditions. However, markups reaching 300 to 500% were viewed as excessive. Severe cases of price gouging were directed to state attorneys general for reporting. The overall situation traced back to the United States military campaign against Iran during May 2026. Pentagon figures showed that the 5-week bombing operation consumed more than 50% of important weapons inventories. Those losses included over 800 Tomahawk missiles, more than 200 SM-6 interceptors, and over 400 JSSM-ER missiles. Manufacturing rates remained far below wartime consumption, meaning replenishment at current capacity levels would require years. On May 2, 2026, Washington informed European allies and Ukraine about extended delays involving NASAMS and HIMARS deliveries. The same companies responsible for those systems also produced civilian ammunition, which now faced rationing measures. The calibers most heavily affected included 5.56, 2.23, 7.62, 3.08, 9mm, and 50 BMG. All entered severe shortage conditions as military contracts received first priority. Primers and powder for reloaders also became unavailable across much of the market. Shotgun shells and rimfire, .22 LR ammunition could remain accessible longer, though shortages of components continued threatening production. Manufacturing facilities were already operating at maximum capacity and could not rapidly increase output. Supply chains remained strained. Military orders held legal priority under the Defense Production Act, while labor shortages restricted expansion efforts. Retailers reported allocation cuts ranging from 40 to 70% from major ammunition manufacturers. Online sellers displayed rising out-of-stock listings, and prices climbed between 20 and 40% with additional increases expected. Local stores introduced purchase limits, while reloading supplies vanished from shelves entirely. Gun owners were urged to secure critical defensive ammunition immediately, with at least 500 rounds considered the minimum reserve. Diversifying into non-military calibers, avoiding panic buying, considering reloading equipment, and monitoring retailers daily became the primary recommendations as the shortage deepened across the civilian market. Stay informed as conditions continue changing rapidly. Watch for manufacturer updates, retailer inventory reports, and shifts in ammunition availability before shelves are completely cleared. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.